My daughter-in-law showed up at my doorstep one cold night clutching my 5-year-old granddaughter like she couldn't wait to let go. She said she had to work a night shift. I didn't question it until the next morning when my little girl whispered, "Grandma, Mom said not to tell you what I saw at home, but..." The way her voice trembled, the look in her eyes, it froze my blood. I didn't even finish my coffee. I called the police, and that call changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Before I tell you what really happened, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes just knowing someone's listening makes it easier to breathe through the memories. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If stories like this move, you please subscribe to our channel. Every click helps more people hear voices like mine, people who lived through the unthinkable and still chose to speak. My name is Odessa Quinn, and this is my story. I'm Odessa Quinn, 62, a widow who keeps a tidy house and a steadier heart than people expect. My world is small on purpose, a wood porch that smells like lilac at night, a living room stitched together by a wool blanket that once warmed my son Graham, a mantle of family frames, and a pendulum clock that tells the truth even when people don't. That night, the porch light hummed a tired yellow as the wind threaded through the lilacs, and Brenna, my daughter-in-law, hovered at the threshold, like someone afraid the floor might give way. She clutched Piper's hand, my 5-year-old Sunrise, as if she couldn't wait to let go. "Night shift," she said, working the strap of her purse, eyes cutting toward the alley, not at me. She didn't step inside like she used to. She kept one foot angled back as if the darkness behind her was on a short leash. Piper didn't ask for cookies the way she always did. She hugged Button the bear with the faded blue bow, her shirt-wrinkled hair flat on one side like she'd slept in the car. I asked them to come in for soup. Brenna flinched at the steam, shook her head, said she had to go now, her voice clipped the sharp, clinical sting of disinfectant rising from her coat. "It's just one night," she added, and when I bent to kiss Piper's hair, Brenna's gaze flicked past me, quick and assessing, like she was checking for something left out in plain sight. I set Piper at the kitchen table, ladled chicken soup into a chipped bowl, slid hot cocoa across the old tablecloth, and let the radio whisper weather and baseball while the clock kept the beat. Piper pushed noodles around without eating shoulders, tight eyes somewhere I couldn't reach. I switched to soft questions and softer silence. Later, I made up the folding bed beside mine, left the lamp glowing low. Past midnight, she jolted and mumbled, "Don't go, Grandma," her fist locked around Button's left paw. I didn't wake her. I smoothed her hair, wrote it down in my little spiral notebook like I always do with things that matter. Piper fears the dark grip's left paw. Morning put a warm stripe of sun across the kitchen linoleum. I fried eggs, warmed the cocoa, cracked the window so the lilac could drift in and fool us both into thinking life was simple. Piper climbed onto the chair, small and careful feet, not quite touching the rung. "What would you like today?" I asked, lightly. She looked at the cocoa like it used to belong to someone else. Then she leaned forward until her voice could hide inside the steam. "Grandma, Mom said not to tell you what I saw at home, but there's a little girl locked in our basement. Her hands hurt. She cries every night." The spoon hit the counter, the glass of milk wobbled and tipped, and the clock skipped a beat that only I could hear. I knelt so we were eye to eye. "Thank you," I whispered, because courage deserves thanks before questions. I asked very little and very slow. "Where is the door? Who goes down? What happens to the crying?" And when her breath turned thin, I stopped. I called 911 with the coiled phone that's seen 3 decades of birthdays and bad news. The dispatcher took the notes, the careful ones, and told me, "We'll log it, ma'am, but we need more specific details and evidence." I said I understood, but the lilac outside the window shivered hard like the wind knew more than we did. The doorbell rang too soon. Brenna, again paler eyes sweeping the living room as if she expected to catch a secret mid-air. "If she makes anything up," she said, chin tight, "don't indulge it. Last night, she'd warned me not to believe Piper's imagination. Now she called it making things up, same idea, different panic. When she turned, I noticed the heel of her boot, a rim of dried red clay I'd never seen in our block, the kind that stains and doesn't live in Spokane's tidy lawns. I tucked that color away with the disinfectant and the alley eyes, and the way her hand trembled at the knob. The lilac whispered again, this time like a promise that wouldn't let me sleep. Grief doesn't arrive once and leave politely. It circles at camps. Mine wears Graham's laugh, and the river light from the day he held Piper up to the sun by the Spokane, her little legs bicycling air, while I pretended not to cry. Back then, the kitchen was a chorus of cinnamon and apple pie, Brenna's hair tucked behind one ear as she asked if he'd like a second slice, and the camera caught us crooked and happy at Manito Park, my hand on his shoulder, his on Piper's back, the world square and steady. Then winter took the road from under him, a whiteout on a two-lane, and the pastor's voice couldn't outshout the wind that battered the chapel doors. Brenna's eyes went empty in a way I recognized but couldn't fix. At the grave, I promised him aloud, because I needed the sky to hear it too, that I'd keep his little girl safe. After the funeral, Brenna folded inward, packed up, and slid their life toward the edge of Pullman, where the map turns quiet and the fields hold onto weather. Calls thinned. Overnights with me came less often, and when they did, Piper spoke in sketches. She drew narrow rooms with heavy corners and stacked dark lines like bars a child would make if she had to draw a sound. I held my tongue more than I wanted, because the fastest way to lose a grandchild in this country is to give someone the word interfere. So I waited and watched and wrote. The disinfectant smell after midnight drop-offs. The way Brenna's voice kept its teeth pressed to each word. The timing always late, always glancing back. I checked Piper's things without making a fuss. Button's fur wore a dusting of white like chalk, rubbed whisper thin, the kind that lives on basement walls and doesn't wash out with one rinse. I logged it beside the red clay. Some days the doubt braided itself through my spine. Was I pushing my loss onto Brenna's silence, turning my son's absence into suspicion? But then the clock would stutter at 2:13 a.m., and I'd hear Piper whimper in her sleep, and the doubt would step back. I pulled an old shoebox from the hall closet, the one with Graham's field notes from the bridges he loved more than his sleep, and found a sketch labeled Basement Drain Older Rentals, east of 27, a quick diagram of venting and sound travel, how concrete and airflow can swallow a cry whole. Brenna used to panic in elevators once backed out of a closet, laughing at herself and shaking. She was afraid of tight spaces before the snow took my boy. Now she keeps a basement locked like a bank vault. People change, yes, but some changes have fingerprints. I set the photo frames on the coffee table, the one of Brenna in summer light cheeks, sun-warmed fingers in pie crust, and I tried to overlay that girl on the woman at my door, scanning my walls for evidence I couldn't name. It didn't fit. I put the picture back and opened the window. Lilac pushed in, soft and stubborn. I dialed the precinct again, pressed through to the same dull voice, gave the same careful answers, and got the same caution about evidence. I thanked him anyway, because it costs nothing, and some men hear better when they're treated like they might grow into the job. By afternoon, the sky built itself into a bruise. I laundered Piper's shirt, and the powder ghosted deeper, not away. I checked the heel of my own boots and then pulled up a county soil map online, in my head the way you can if you've planted enough roses. Spokane's yard dirt runs brown to gray. Pullman wears iron in its clay, a red that marks you if you step wrong after rain. Brenna had been somewhere she didn't want mentioned. I told myself to breathe, to keep my hands where Piper could see them, to ask little and listen hard. If my granddaughter wasn't inventing monsters, then someone had built one and buried it under concrete. Was that grief turned sideways, or something darker with rules and rituals of its own? I stared at the page with Graham's basement sketch until the lines rose and resettled. If there was a door, there was a way in, and if there was a way in, there was a way out. I closed the notebook, stood at the window, and watched the lilac bow and straighten like a woman in a storm who had decided not to break. The next morning, I decided to stop guessing and start gathering. If Brenna's world was sealed behind closed doors, I needed to find someone who'd seen what I hadn't. At the preschool, the hall smelled of finger paint and wet paper towels. Miss Carmichael Piper's teacher greeted me with the soft exhaustion of a woman who listens to too many stories from small voices. When I mentioned that Piper had seemed withdrawn, she hesitated, then walked to a shelf lined with wicker baskets. From one, she pulled a stack of drawings. "I thought you might want to see these," she said. Each sheet looked like the inside of a storm, dark, crayon loops, heavy lines. One picture stopped me cold, a small figure, curled in a rectangle surrounded by vertical black strokes. In the corner, written in shaky pencil, were the words, "Don't tell." Ms. Carmichael lowered her voice. "Piper jumps when doors slam. She refuses to sit near the plaster casts during art hour. She said they hurt." Her eyes met mine, cautious but sincere. I nodded, thanked her, and took a photo of the drawing with my phone. Outside, the sun was too bright, too clean for what was crawling in my stomach. I drove to Mr. Whitaker's house at the end of Birch Lane. His porch sat high above the street, the wood creaking beneath my shoes. He was out there with his old binoculars, watching the sky like it might tell him something. "I heard you went to the police," he said, his voice like sandpaper. "You were right to." I told him what Piper had said. His face tightened. "I've seen her. A little girl smaller than your grandkid bandaged hand led by Brenna into the house after midnight last week. I thought it was strange." He scratched his chin. "Heard crying, too faint but real." He pointed toward the alley. "If I can fix the footage from my security camera, you'll see it. Old equipment, but maybe still worth something." With that faint thread of hope, I headed to the precinct downtown. The floor was tiled in scuffed brick, the air heavy with burnt coffee. At the counter, Captain Holt listened while flipping through papers, the same calm indifference, worn by people who've seen everything and believe half. I showed him my notes, the drawing, the teacher's account, and what Mr. Whitaker had told me. He nodded, his pen ticking like a metronome. "It's not that we don't care, Mrs. Quinn, but we need physical evidence. So far, it's a child's words and a neighbor's observation. There's no probable cause for a search warrant." His tone was kind but closed. He handed me a card with a number for community outreach. That was the polite version of dismissal. Walking out into the gray daylight, I felt the edges of my composure give way. The city noise seemed far away, muffled as if I were listening from underwater. A young officer passed me in the hall, glanced at the picture on my phone, and said quietly, "Those bars don't look wooden. Looks like metal beams, maybe an old basement frame." I turned to ask what he meant, but he'd already walked off. It was a small crack, but it let the air back in. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and began logging every sound, every faint rhythm I heard from down the street, the hum of tires, a dull thump at 1:07 a.m., another at 1:14. I wrote them like prayers that might add up to proof. I reread the notes on how to talk with a child without leading them questions, neutral tone, gentle. If no one would help me, I would at least learn how to protect her voice. But the world outside my house was already turning. At the market the next morning, whispers trailed behind me like threads of smoke. "Poor woman losing her grip," someone murmured. "She misses her son too much." By the time I reached my driveway, a folded note was tucked under a lilac branch. "Leave that poor woman alone," signed Neighbors of Maple Ridge. I didn't need to open it twice to know whose hand had planted the rumor. That evening, I called Mr. Whitaker again, my voice low. "Did you fix it?" He sighed through the receiver. "The file's corrupted. But I'm trying a new program. If I get anything, you'll be the first to see it." I stayed up on the porch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of Graham's cologne. Around midnight, the wind carried something that didn't belong to wind. 2 soft knocks from far off, uneven, then silence. The air was thick with damp soil. I stood heart racing, staring down the dark stretch that led toward Brenna's street. My phone lit up on the table beside me. A message from Mr. Whitaker. Got it. Come by in the morning. Morning came slow and heavy. I went to the farmer's market like I always did, hoping the ordinary could still save me. But the market had changed its face. People turned slightly as I passed, pretending to rearrange fruit to check prices that hadn't moved in years. A woman I'd known for 2 decades whispered to another, "She's not all there anymore." I smiled anyway, because that's what women my age are taught to do. Smile through suspicion. When I came home, a sheet of paper was pinned to my mailbox with a thumbtack. "Leave that poor woman alone." The same sentence, same hand. My yard, my porch, my flowers, they all felt like they'd been borrowed by someone else. Late that afternoon, Brenna pulled up with her brother Tyler. The engine cut and the silence after it was sharp. I watched them from the window. Tyler's stride was angry before his mouth opened. "You're spreading lies about my sister," he barked the moment I opened the door. Brenna stood behind him, arms crossed, face blank, but her fingers twitching. "You want them to take Piper from me, don't you?" she said. Her tone was ice, her eyes shining too bright. I tried to explain I was only trying to keep everyone safe, that I'd gone to the police quietly. Tyler moved closer, jabbing a finger in the air. "You think you're some kind of detective?" Brenna pulled out her phone camera, aimed straight at me. "Go ahead," she said flatly. "Tell everyone your crazy theory." I didn't move. Let her record. Let her collect whatever story she needed. My heart broke in slow motion, seeing Piper in the car, outside, small face pressed against the window button, clutched to her chest. She wasn't waving. She was watching, frozen her eyes, too, knowing, for 5 years old. After they drove away, I walked out to the yard, needing air that didn't smell like accusation. A flash of fabric caught my eye near the porch step. Piper's scarf, soft and small, the one with daisies embroidered along the edge. I lifted it gently. On the fringe, a smudge of dried red clay clung stubbornly. I'd seen that color before, not here, not in Spokane. It belonged to the Pullman Hills, the soil that stains like guilt. I folded it carefully, slid it into my notebook. That night, I called the only friend who still answered my number. Nora Bell's voice came through like a hand on my shoulder. "They've turned the whole neighborhood against me," I said. She sighed. "Let them talk. Find someone who's seen her late at night. Truth doesn't stay buried forever." At dusk, a knock echoed through the house. Mr. Whitaker stood on the porch, hair windblown, eyes bright. "You better come see this," he said quietly. In his living room, the old monitor flickered lines of static cutting through. On the screen, Brenna appeared leading a small figure toward her house at 12:47 a.m. The child's arm was wrapped in a bandage. The footage was grainy, but the outline of fear was unmistakable. Mr. Whitaker's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the focus. "That's not your granddaughter," he whispered. I nodded. My stomach turned. Back home, the night pressed close. The radio murmured a local report. Authorities continue to search for a missing girl from Latah County believed to be 5 years old. The name barely reached me. It was enough just to know the age matched. Brenna's video of me spread online the next morning, her calm voice narrating how I'd lost touch with reality. Neighbors stopped saying hello. I became the story they told to feel sane about their own secrets. But even as my world shrank, the pieces began to fit. The scarf, the red soil, the crying at night, the missing child, and now the shadow behind Brenna in Mr. Whitaker's footage, a tall man in a dark coat, half hidden by the car. I froze the frame. On his shoulder, faint but visible under the streetlight, a triangle symbol stitched into the fabric. I sat on my porch till the sky went black, the air thick with lilac and rain. The video flickered on my phone, silent proof that something unspeakable had slipped into our quiet neighborhood. I whispered to the windogram, to whoever still listened, "If this is real, it's not just Piper who's in danger. and when the first light crept over the horizon, I knew what I had to do next: take the evidence back to the police, no matter who thought I was crazy. The sky was the color of old metal when I walked into the Spokane police station for the second time. My palms were damp, but my voice no longer trembled. I'd rehearsed every detail what Piper said: the drawings, the scarf, the sounds, the video. I wasn't leaving until someone listened. The lobby hummed under white-blue neon lights, smelling faintly of burnt coffee and floor wax. Captain Holt was behind his desk, sleeves rolled up a stack of reports crowding the edge. I placed the flash drive and my notes in front of him. "It's time you looked again," I said. He sighed, leaned back, and played the video. On the screen, Brenna appeared, guiding a small figure toward her porch. The child's arm bandaged, the night grainy and half swallowed by static. "Could be your granddaughter," he muttered. His eyes narrowed. "Same height." I leaned forward steady. "No, look closely. The child in that frame is smaller, her hair shorter, her pajamas patterned with clouds. Piper doesn't own those." The captain hesitated. A younger officer standing near the monitor bent closer, then froze. "Sir? This looks like Aubrey Klein," he said. "The missing girl from Latta County. Same age, same haircut." The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent light. Holt straightened. "Run the photo," he ordered. Within minutes, a match came back, 90% certainty. He flipped through the case file, cross-referenced dates. Brenna's last visit to my house the night Piper stayed over matched the window of Aubrey's disappearance almost exactly. I watched his skepticism drain away, replaced by a colder, sharper focus. He picked up his phone, called for a data check on Brenna's number. When the map loaded, a red dot pulsed on Route 27, right near the old forest line. She was there, he said quietly, the same place those Corbin Rook symbols were found last month. The captain's voice shifted lower now. "Mrs. Quinn, you might have just saved a child." Two neighbors arrived later that afternoon, both admitting they'd heard strange noises, soft crying, muffled thuds coming from Brenna's house at night. One described seeing lights flicker on and off, though the windows were always covered. Their statements filled the gaps in my notes like bricks in a wall. For the first time, that wall began to look like something solid. Still, the relief came laced with fear. The captain confirmed they would open a search investigation. Yet the original footage from Mr. Whitaker's camera had been deleted. "This is just a copy," the tech officer explained. "Someone accessed the device remotely and wiped it. Whoever did that knew exactly what they were doing." As I left the station, rain thickened, drumming against the windshield like restless fingers. Across the street, a dark car sat idle, headlights off engine, barely audible. My reflection in the glass flickered between fear and fury. I drove away, but the car didn't move until I turned the corner. At home, the message arrived as I set down my keys. "Stop digging, old woman. You'll lose her too." My chest clenched so tight I could hardly breathe. Piper's face came to mind, her eyes, her small hand around Button's paw. I pressed delete and locked every door in the house. Later that night, the precinct phone rang through to Captain Holt. I could hear it in his tone when he called back. The task force from Latta confirmed it. Corbin Rook's followers rented that property before your daughter-in-law moved in. My throat went dry. The words landed heavy as truth. By midnight, the house smelled of damp lilac and rain. I stood before Graham's photograph on the wall, the one where his smile caught halfway between boy and man. "Your wife didn't lose her mind," I whispered. "She lost her soul to something that promised you back." A knock startled me, soft, deliberate. Mr. Whitaker stood there, coat dripping a printed frame, clutched in his hand. "Look at this," he said. The image was clearer than before. The man behind Brenna in the video wasn't just a shadow. On his shoulder, stitched bright against the dark fabric, was the triangle symbol. And inside it, the word Rook. The morning broke without light, a gray fog blanketing the bridge over the Spokane River as the police convoy rolled across. I rode in the second car beside Captain Holt, the air thick with the smell of wet metal and anticipation. My hands lay clenched in my lap, the sound of the sirens replaced by the heavier silence of what we might find. Brenna's house sat at the edge of a forgotten block, half swallowed by weeds. The paint on the siding had peeled into curls, and the ground near the steps glistened with the same red soil I'd seen on her boots. Piper's tricycle leaned against the porch, one wheel bent. When Brenna opened the door, confusion flickered first, then anger. "What is this?" she demanded. Tyler appeared behind her jaw, tight eyes shifting between the officers. Captain Holt presented the warrant, his tone calm but unbending. "We're here to search the property." Brenna's voice rose, trembling. "You can't do this. There's nothing here but me and my daughter." She turned to me, her expression breaking into a twisted plea. "Mi muan hui joy toi sao." I didn't answer. I just looked toward the corner of the room where Piper sat, knees tucked to her chest. Button held close, eyes wide and wet. The officers spread through the house, opening drawers, checking closets. Brenna followed them, pacing like a caged animal. "It's just old furniture," she kept saying. "The basement's a mess. You don't need to go down there." But Holt signaled two officers forward. One bent, turning the latch on the basement door. The lock broke with a metallic crack. A breath of foul, cold air rolled up the stairs, heavy with something sweet and rotting. Then came a sound, soft at first, then clear. A child's whimper. "Please don't close it again." The flashlight beams cut through the dark. At the bottom of the stairs, a small girl crouched beside a broken crate, her hands wrapped in white gauze eyes, wide and unseeing from the glare. Aubrey Klein. Her lips moved soundlessly before a sob took her. For a long second, no one breathed. Brenna screamed. "You don't understand. He said she'd bring Graham back." She tried to lunge forward, but Tyler grabbed her, shouting something incoherent. Officers restrained them both as Holt descended, lifting Aubrey gently. The girl clung to his sleeve like someone afraid the world above might disappear. In the corner of the basement sat a crate filled with papers, candles, glass, jars. On the top lay a folder marked "Rebirth of Light." Inside were pages scrawled with circle symbols and a signature Brenna's beside the initials CR. I turned away, bile burning my throat. When they cuffed her, Brenna stopped struggling. She looked at me, face streaked with tears and grime. "I did it for him," she whispered. "He promised if I kept the girl safe, Graham would come back." Her voice broke into a scream as they led her out. "You ruined everything. He was going to fix it," Piper cried from the doorway, reaching out as her mother passed. "Mommy!" The sound split something inside me. I knelt, arms open. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe." She fell into me, her tiny frame shaking. Outside, the world was flashing red and blue. The press had already arrived, cameras glinting under the rain. Paramedics lifted Aubrey onto a stretcher, her hand disappearing under a blanket. Tyler sat in the back of a squad car, his head bowed. Brenna's screams echoed from another vehicle, raw and broken. I signed the witness statement with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The rain grew heavier, beating against the ground until everything blurred. The uniforms, the lights, the faces. I stepped onto the porch, my shoes sinking into the muddy lilac roots. Somewhere behind me, an officer called out coordinates. Another confirmed the paperwork. I didn't hear the rest. I just stared at the lilacs bending under the rain, their color bleeding into the earth. Truth isn't gentle. I whispered to the storm, but at least tonight it was heard. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and wet wool. Outside, rain beat the windows in relentless waves, each drop a reminder that the world was still moving after everything had stopped for us. I arrived soaked through raincoat, dripping the echo of my footsteps, trailing down the long, sterile hallway. Sacred Heart's lights were too bright, too white, but I followed them anyway until I reached room 204. Aubrey lay small beneath the sheets, her hands still wrapped in gauze, the monitor beside her pulsing, steady beeps. Her parents stood near the window. When they saw me, they both started to cry. The mother took my hand, her voice barely a breath. "You didn't just save our daughter," she said. "You made people believe in the truth again." I wanted to say something, anything but words would have cheapened the moment. I just nodded, watching the thin reflection of light travel across Aubrey's face. She looked so much like Piper when she slept, the same small rise of her chest, the same quiet surrender to safety. Captain Holt arrived not long after. His uniform was soaked at the edges, his face tired but certain. She confessed, he told me, voice low, "Your daughter-in-law said she was deceived by someone from the Corbin Rook sect. They promised her that through ritual she could bring her husband back. She believed them." I closed my eyes, and in the darkness, I could still hear Brenna's voice echoing from that basement, raw and desperate. Outside, news vans lined the curb. Spokane's evening broadcast ran headlines that spilled through the hospital lobby. Grandmother's call, leads to child rescue and cult arrest. Cameras flashed when I walked by, but I kept my head down. I didn't do this for attention. I did it because no one else had listened. When the captain left, an officer escorted me down a side hallway to a smaller wing. Brenna was being held in a medical cell until she could be transferred. I hesitated at the door, but Holt's words followed me. Sometimes the only way to end it is to look. Inside the room was dim. Brenna sat against the wall, wrists bandaged, eyes hollow. She didn't look at me at first. Then slowly she lifted her head. "You won," she said, her voice rough. "But Piper will hate you for this." I stepped closer. "No one won, Brenna," I said softly. "A child was heard. That's all." Her tears came silent, running along a face I once thought I knew. What sat across from me wasn't the woman Graham had married. It was a shadow wearing her skin. I left before the nurses returned the sound of her crying, following me out like something unfinished. The rain hadn't stopped when I reached the lobby. By then, my face had been on the local news. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me began leaving letters at my doorstep, apologies written on lined paper bouquets of lilac tied in twine. Mr. Whitaker came by hat in hand. "You proved us wrong," he said. "You did what none of us had the guts to do." I told the reporters the same thing I told him. I just listened when a child whispered. A few days later, Holt called. They'd found more files among Brenna's papers, a list of children labeled chosen. My stomach turned when he read the first name aloud. Piper Quinn. My granddaughter's name written as a promise of sacrifice. My hand shook so badly I had to sit down. That night, Nora Bell phoned, her voice sharp with fear. "Someone's been near your house," she said. I saw a man watching from across the street, same triangle patch on his jacket. Within the hour, officers were sent to guard the property. Holt insisted on moving me and Piper to a hotel downtown until things settled. In the small room overlooking the city, I watched Piper sleep beside me, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the only sound. Outside, sirens wailed, far away, swallowed by the rain. At some point between wakefulness and dream, I saw Graham again. He was standing in the same doorway where I'd once told him goodbye, smiling softly. "She's safe now, Mom," he said. "You can rest." I woke to the first pale light of morning tears drying on my cheeks. Piper stirred, whispering, "Grandma, am I in trouble for telling?" I brushed her hair from her face. "No, sweetheart," I said. "You were brave when no one else was." Outside the window, rain fell slower now, the hospital lights reflecting through the mist like softened halos. For the first time in months, the world looked less cruel and more like it was beginning again. 6 months passed. Spokane's winter gave way to a forgiving summer, and the lilacs bloomed again. Their scent lingered like something earned. Piper and I had moved to a small wooden house by Coeur d'Alene Lake, a white-fenced cottage with wide windows and quiet mornings. The water shimmered silver in the distance. Every dawn I sat on the porch with my coffee, listening to Piper's laughter drift from the garden. Each day felt like stitching a torn world back together. Brenna was sentenced to 25 years in prison for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and aiding a criminal organization. Tyler faced trial soon after. The Corbin Rook cult unraveled completely once the documents from Brenna's basement surfaced. People came forward frightened but free. The news called it the light rebirth case. But to me, it was just the long shadow of grief turned violent. Aubrey's parents invited me to her 6th birthday party that spring. She ran to me with a new doll in her arms and handed me a pot of white lilac. "For you," she said shyly. Her mother added, "So you'll always know what you gave back to the world." Piper and I planted those lilacs by the porch, mixing them with the purple kind that had survived every season at my old house. Each morning I watered them, each evening I breathed in their scent like a prayer. Piper was healing. She'd started kindergarten again, laughing more sometimes, sleeping without button clutch so tight. The nights were quieter, but recovery is never clean. There were still moments when shadows touched the glass just right, and I'd flinch at a knock that wasn't there. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd wake convinced I could hear Brenna's voice calling from somewhere far away. Yet every morning when Piper's small hand found mine, that fear thinned like mist in sunlight. I taught her simple truths: how to speak up, how to trust her instincts, how even little voices can change the world. One afternoon we visited Graham's grave. The grass was green and soft, the sky wide enough to hold everything I couldn't say. I set a small pot of lilac beside his stone. "She's safe now, Graham," I whispered. "And so am I." While packing an old chest from the storage room later that week, I found a worn envelope tucked between photo albums. The handwriting was Brenna's. Inside was a family picture, Graham holding Piper Brenna, smiling in the sunlight, and a note in trembling ink. "If I ever lose control, please keep her safe for me." The paper smelled faintly of disinfectant. I sat there for a long time, the photo trembling in my hand, understanding that beneath all the madness had been a woman who once loved fiercely and lost too much. Days later, another letter came unsigned. "Thank you," it read. "Because of you, I left the Rook Circle. You saved more than one child." I folded it and placed it inside my journal between pages about the night the rain wouldn't stop. That weekend, I planted the final lilac along the porch rail. Piper watched dirt smudged on her cheeks. "Grandma," she asked, "will these flowers ever stop blooming?" I smiled and pressed the soil down around the roots. Only when people stop listening to the truth. The wind carried the scent through the yard, sweet and full. The afternoon light spilled across the wooden floorboards, catching the edges of old photographs, Graham's smile frozen in a happier time. Piper and Aubrey played in the yard, their laughter floating over the water like bells. I opened my notebook one last time and wrote, "The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the voice of a child." Then I closed it, let the pen rest, and sat quietly as the sunlight broke through the lilacs, turning their petals the softest shade of violet, an ending and a beginning, all in one breath.